friends. It's Ms. Andrews, and I wanted to talk to you about something today because I don't know about you, but I have been thinking a lot about our world right now. And let's face it, it feels a little bit crazy right now. There's so much going on. And so when things get like this, it feels really confusing. It feels challenging. Life feels hard right now. And so for me personally, I am just trying to make sense of things. I'm trying to make sense of the world. And one of the things that I know we're all doing is spending a lot more time with family right now. And so I've been thinking about, in order to understand the world, I also need to understand people, the people in my life better because I'm spending so much more time with them. And I've also been thinking a lot about other people, people who I don't even know, people I'm reading about in the news, I'm watching on the news, I'm reading articles about because there's so much going on. And so I'm trying to make sense of that. The other thing I'm thinking about is how important it is to understand even characters in books, because when we're reading books, we're thinking about fiction, realistic fiction or historical fiction, any kind of fiction, really. We are often reading these books through the eyes of characters, of other people. And I know that books have a lot to teach us. There are always lessons in the books that we read. And having that understanding, that different point of view of trying to understand somebody else's point of view can be really helpful in terms of making sense of the world. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to be thinking about ourselves and we're going to be looking at our own identity, because once we understand ourselves better, we can also begin the critical work of understanding others and understanding the world. So before we begin, we're going to just establish what our learning intentions are today. And learning intentions just means, what will we be learning today? So we're going to learn a couple of things. One is we're going to learn about these things called identity markers that make up our identity, who we are. And the other thing is, how can I understand my own identity? So those are the learning intentions. And in order to be successful, you'll have some success, what's called success criteria. And we'll talk a lot about that this year. And success criteria just means exactly that. I know I'm successful when I can name a few identity markers. And I'm going to help you out with that, so you'll be familiar with many different identity markers. And also when you can name different parts of yourself. So different parts of yourself being your outside, your inside, what's around you, and what you do. So I always encourage my students to ask me, why is this important? And that's the relevance behind this lesson. Why is this lesson so important? And how is it going to help us be better learners, be better readers, be better at understanding the world? So by working on this, doing this identity work, it's actually going to help us understand ourselves, which will inevitably help us understand each other. It will also help us bring our identities to the texts we read, and it will help us understand the characters in the texts that we read and their identities. And when I say texts, it might be a realistic fiction text, it might be even a video, it might be a piece of historical fiction, it might be a newspaper article. So when we understand ourselves best, we can bring ourselves to the texts, and that will help us understand others better. So I told you that we would be going over some identity markers. And if you take a look on this page, you will see a number of identity markers. And what's going to be really important for you is to have access to these identity markers. So I'm going to ask you right now, if you have not gotten yourself a reader's notebook and a tool, a writing tool, can you pause the video right now and go make sure that you have your reader's notebook and make sure you have a writing tool, and then come right back on. All right, so hopefully you've got your reader's notebook and you've got a pen. And so when you are looking at this page, you can actually identify some words, and you can also see some images. Some are photographs, some are drawings. And I'm going to just go over them. And you can even, as we're doing this, think about what words do you know? What words might you have heard of? They might be somewhat familiar. And also, what words do you have no idea about? You have no idea what that is. And you can even try and match up the pictures with those words and what you think goes with what. So there's race as an identity marker, there's gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, ability, language, and spirituality. Now, these are just some identity markers. There are many, many, many more, and we'll talk more about that. But right now, can you pause the video and write these down in your notebook and write down what you think about these things? Have you heard them? What do you know about them? What are your thoughts about them? And if you are doing this work with a partner or a class, you can actually stop and talk with your classmates right now and just share what is it that you know, what things come to mind, what ideas come to mind when you see these words. So go ahead and pause and chat and jot down a little bit before we begin. All right. So, in order to understand ourselves really well, what we're going to need to do is to understand ourselves. And one of the ways we can understand ourselves well is by just thinking about the different parts of ourselves. So there's the outside, and the outside is, who are you? What do you look like? What do people see? What's sort of the obvious thing? And then another part of you is your inside. What are some things that people would not know by looking at me? Those are the things that are invisible. And another part of me is around. What are the places that are home to you? What is in your community? Who is in your community? And lastly, the things that you do. What are the things that you like to do? What are your hobbies? What are your passions? And sometimes also in that what you do, there may be some things in there that you don't like to do, but you have to do them. There may be things that aren't hobbies or passions, but just things that you need to do and you do pretty regularly. So right now, I'm going to ask you to pause the video again, and you can talk with a partner, you can talk with your class. If you are doing this remotely, you can even write some things in the chat box about different parts of your identity that you're thinking about. And I'm going to be sharing my own map, my own identity map with you so you can get an idea of what this work looks like. So go ahead and pause and chat and maybe even jot if you're doing this alone. What are some things that are coming to mind? Okay. So we're going to start with the outside, and I'm going to just model this for you so you can get an understanding of what this identity work looks like. You don't have to stop and jot right now. You're going to have time eventually to do your own identity map. So just pay attention to how I am thinking about parts of myself and how I'm linking those parts of myself with those identity markers that I talked about a few minutes ago. So, first of all, on the outside, I think the first thing that people see is that I am a white woman. And if we go back to those identity markers, right away, you'll see those first two things, race and gender. So I am Caucasian, I'm a white person, and I also identify as female, as a woman. You can see the picture of me in the bottom left-hand corner there. And you can see I have some gray hair, which tells people I'm not really young, but I'm also not old. Um, you can actually be young with gray hair and you can be old with dark hair. But there's definitely something about my hair which tells people can guess about what age I am. I'm also pretty short, which is something people comment on a lot. It's kind of surprising, actually, how many people comment on it. I was in a grocery store the other day, and the person at the counter asked me how tall I was. She's short also and was just curious about my height. Another thing, this might not seem like it's on the outside, but I speak French. And so if I'm speaking French, that might seem invisible if I'm not speaking in French to you, but if you were to hear me, you would hear another language, and so it's no longer invisible. So that's another identity marker. What language or languages do you speak? You all speak English. You're listening to this video, but maybe English isn't your first language. Maybe English is your second language. Maybe your first language is Spanish or French or Arabic or Chinese. So those are some other things. I am a teacher. I It's a huge part of my identity, my profession, the work that I do every day. I show up in a classroom or I show up at my home teaching. The other thing is I'm a mother of two grown children, and you can see in that picture I am with my son on the left and my daughter and her boyfriend. And being a mother is a very important part of who I am. And while I'm divorced from their father, I do have a partner who I've been with for a long time. And so that's also the fact that I am a partner to somebody is an important part of my identity. And then the other thing is that when I'm not teaching, I wear a lot of yoga clothes. And so just the way I dress, you can think about the way you dress. What are the clothes that are most comfortable for you? Sometimes that's also a big part of your identity. So you can see that's just some of the work. I could have spent more time on the outside and who I am, but that's what this work looks like in terms of really going in deep and describing not just one or two things outside of you that people can see, but many things. So on the inside, what are some things that people would not know by looking at me? So one thing that surprises people is that I'm an immigrant. And my parents are also immigrants. They come from Canada. We all moved from Canada, but originally my father was born in England and my mother was born in India. I'm actually part Indian. I was born in Canada, as I said, and that's a huge part of my identity. Also, the fact that I grew up in another country and I have that experience as an immigrant moving to the United States. And that was a really, actually, a pretty hard thing for me when I moved here. A lot of people would say, "Oh, you're American. You're from North America. You're American. Americans and Canadians are just the same." But that's not true. Um, the part of me that's Canadian is actually a very important part. And oftentimes, when I first especially moved to the United States, I really didn't feel like I belonged here at all. So I'm also thinking about parts of my identity having to do with my personality because those are invisible. My friend recently told me I'm a very compassionate person because I'm often very sensitive to other people's needs. I'm a really hard worker and I have very high expectations of myself. And therefore, I have high expectations of other people. So, those are some things inside of me. And I think I could spend a lot more time on this. Um, but I'm going to just keep going. So, the next thing is what's around you? What are the places that are home to you? What and who is in your community? So, I live currently in Northampton and I live on a pretty quiet street, tree lined street. I have some neighbors who I'm not really close to, but I appreciate them. Some of my neighbors are old, some of them are really young. There are a lot of young children around on my street. Some people in my neighborhood are white and some people are brown. My neighbors who live behind me are Latino and they speak Spanish in addition to English. The people in my community in my town in Northampton where I live, there's a huge range. Some people can be really struggling financially and just struggling to put food on the table. So sometimes I volunteer at a food bank. And then there are a lot of people who have a lot of money and they live in big houses. And I don't think struggling for food is an issue for them. And when I'm doing this work, I'm actually, as I'm thinking about money, I'm thinking about, and I might float between my different parts of me because now I'm thinking about something on the inside that you wouldn't know by looking at me is how I grew up in terms of how much money my family had. And when I was really young, my family didn't really have a lot of money, and money was a big issue for me growing up. We didn't have a lot. There were times, even in my adult life, when I got out of college, when financially it was hard for me, and I remember buying things in the store that were really inexpensive, and I would buy pasta and rice so that I could save my money to pay my other bills. So sometimes when we're doing this work, we might be thinking about something and that something belongs in another part of yourself. So, my other home, while we're talking about around you, my other home is Canada, where I was born. I still think of it as home. And when I grew up, there were many, many people from different countries where I'm from. My best friend was from Trinidad. My other very good friend was from Hong Kong. And when I go home, I'm often the only white person in the places where I spend time. And that's also just a part of my identity, the fact that I grew up in a very diverse community. So, lastly, the last part is what do you like to do? What are your hobbies and passions? So, I'm a teacher. I love to teach. I wouldn't say that's a hobby, that's more my career, but it's definitely a passion. I love to write. Teaching writing is probably my most favorite thing to teach. In fact, I write every single morning in my morning pages. I write 3 pages front and back every day. I also love to garden. You can see pictures of my spiral there that I created and part of my garden. I love to do yoga. I've been doing yoga for about 18 years, and that's an important part of my life and part of my identity. I also consider myself a photographer. I love to take pictures of people. I'm constantly taking pictures of nature. You can see the picture of my garden, the passion flower in the middle. I love to take hikes in the woods. And the picture on the left is of me and my children and my daughter's boyfriend hiking in the woods. And I love riding my bike. These are all things that I really love to do and that I think of myself. I don't just think I like to take pictures, but I think of myself as a photographer, as a bicyclist, as a hiker, as a gardener, as a writer. And I also love to read and be by myself. And that's something too, it feels a little bit like a personality trait, but I love my solitude. I need my solitude. And every day I read and I read a lot. And then lastly, something that I like to do, it's sort of a hobby, I guess. It's kind of a funny one, but it's something I do on my own, and that is to sing jingles. And jingles are like those little commercials, songs that you might hear on the radio. And they make me laugh. And I do this when no one's watching, when I'm driving my car. I might drive by a Cumberland Farms or Haymarket Cafe in my town, and I'll do a little song, a little jingle, a little ad. And it's just a fun little silly thing I do. So this is what this work looks like. And you are going to be doing it also. And you can see when I did this work originally, I divided up my reader's notebook page into quarters, as you can see. And I just jotted down notes for myself And I put them all on one page, but you might decide you've just got so much to do that maybe you even have one page per part, or maybe you put outside and inside on one page and what's around you and what you do on another page. So, right now, go ahead, pause the video, and turn and talk to a partner or share in the chat room or share with your class. How might you set up your notebook so that you can do this identity work, these parts of yourself identity work, in a way that is going to be really easy for you to access when you bring your identity with you to the texts that you're going to be reading this year? So, go ahead and pause. Okay. So, as you do this work, you're going to be thinking about what parts of your identity are surfacing, what experiences from your life are coming up. Did you notice any of the identity markers? Did any of those come up? When I went back and revisited my identity, I thought about something that I hadn't originally added, and that was in my family, I grew up with two sisters and I'm the youngest. And I started thinking, wow, a big part of my identity is my birth order, the fact that I'm the youngest. And so I went ahead and added that, even though it wasn't on the identity marker. And so I put something that you might not see on the inside is my birth order, the fact that I'm the youngest. And I went and did a little bit more writing about that. And I'm wondering what came up for you? So again, I want to just talk about why does this matter? So understanding ourselves is going to help us understand each other better. It's going to help us understand the world better. And understanding ourselves is going to help us bring our identities to the texts that we are reading. And when we bring our identities to the texts we're reading, it's going to help us understand the characters and their identities. So I know there may have been some identity markers that weren't answered for you that you might have some more questions about. And don't worry about that too much. You can talk to your friends about it. You can talk with your class about it, to your teacher about it. But we're going to be doing more of this work about those different identity markers as we do some read alouds. See you next time.